This is the MacBook Air M2, and I've had this machine for a couple of years now. I originally bought it for work purposes, as it has absolutely fantastic battery life, giving me at least 12, sometimes 15 hours for work purposes, and it's great for me to walk around my building with this machine and know that I've got the comfort of that battery life. But I quickly have come to see that actually moving from Windows to Mac has had several benefits. And by the way, this is not going to be a Windows bashing video. And the reason for that is because I've been a happy Windows user for many decades. But moving to this machine had quite a few advantages. And the first is I actually really like macOS and the interface. Secondly, I really like the way this connects seamlessly to the Mac ecosystem and my AirPods and my phone and all the other devices that I own. I've also noticed this with this machine that once it's unplugged, you don't lose any power, and that's not been my experience in Windows land. I used to have a Dell XPS 17-inch, and whilst it had a absolutely fantastic screen and was plenty powerful enough, it did have an incredibly noisy fan, and it used to drive me nuts just going into Google and doing some simple searching, feeling like I had a hairdryer in my ear. And as you can see, I have no use for hairdryers in this day and age. I also found my Dell XPS to be quite heavy, and these are wonderfully light machines. I can just open the screen and the machine is on and ready to go. There's no boot up process like there is in Windows land, and you can probably keep your Windows laptop closed, but the issues that I've experienced, particularly with my Dell, is that it absolutely sucked battery life out of the machine. And so I'd come back to it 10 hours later to find that 15–20% of the battery had gone. And I don't have that problem in macOS. Now, don't get me wrong, you're going to need to work in Windows in Astronomy. If you're rocking with Nina or Sequence Generator Pro, they all tend to work in Windows only. They don't work on Mac. And there's nothing wrong with working in Windows. But it did get me thinking about whether it was time for me to switch to Mac for my personal life and how that would fit in with Astronomy, and whether it would work in programs like PixInsight. I initially went on internet forums, and there's a huge amount of advice out there about needing oodles of RAM and oodles of power, and if you've not got the right kind of spec machine, then you're in trouble. I couldn't find too much information on what life was like using a Mac, particularly in something like PixInsight. Have these machines got enough power to run PixInsight competently or not?
Oh, hi Martin. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Wow, M4, eh?
Where were we? Talking MacBooks.
What do you think about it?
Yeah, great.
Oh,
yeah. Do you mind? I'd like to talk with them.
Yeah.
Okay.
You
I'll let
carry
you.
on.
Yeah. Anyway, I took the plunge and I bought my own M4 MacBook Pro, and I haven't looked back. It's wonderful to use in PixInsight, and in today's video I want to show you how easy it is to use either a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro, and spoiler, they're both great to use in PixInsight. Let me show you. Well, let's start by talking about the MacBook Pro model with the M4 processor, which has got 14 cores. It's also got 48 gigabytes installed and a 2 terabyte hard drive. I've booted up PixInsight and we are ready to go with a blank screen, and we'll do several tests. So I'm going to test both Macs against several typical tasks that we all do when we're image processing. One will be to run the weighted batch pre-processing script, and the other tests will be to try it with Russ Croman's Star Exterminator and also Blur Exterminator. Those are all fairly processor or graphic card intensive processor tests, so it will give us a good idea of how quickly these things run on a Mac. So let's start with weighted batch processing. By the way, you might notice that on my screen I didn't click anything, and yet the weighted batch processing script has just come up. That's because I'm using a Creative Console by Logitech, and if you want to know a little bit more about that, stay tuned to the end of the video and I'll explain a little bit further. So now we're in the weighted batch pre-processing script. We're going to process just a simple run that simulates a typical night of imaging. So in this case, I've been imaging the Christmas tree nebula, and I have hydrogen alpha only from this night. So I have in my lights tab 18 frames of hydrogen alpha light frames, which were 900 seconds or 15 minutes each. I've also got 20 flat frames. I don't use darks with my camera, I don't need them, but I have got a bias which I have already stacked. So this simulates a typical process. We could go further, we could do a whole night of RGB, and I know for some people out there who do 30-second images in their cameras that you could have oodles and oodles to stack, but this is just a quick test to really show you the differences between the MacBooks and a snapshot of what they're like in processing. So with that, we can go to the post calibration tab and you can see it's got 18 frames. We go to the pipeline and it tells us what we're going to do there. There's a list of things that we're going to do. We've set an output directory there. Interesting name there. Anyway, let's carry on. So I'm going to run this script and then this is what it's going to do. We'll run that script now and we will see how long it takes before it's complete. So that process has now finished and you can see from the screen that that has done the full weighted batch pre-processing script for 18 files in a fairly speedy 1 minute 30. And you can imagine if you did shoot shorter frames of 30 seconds that you'd probably be looking at 6-7 minutes for a night of imaging. So fairly quick. Next on screen you can see I've got my final image. I'm just going to use my Creative Console and do a screen stretch of a sideways Christmas tree. Let's have a look, shall we, and see what Blur Exterminator does. So we've booted up the process. I'm going to ask it to just reset the tool. We've got 50 on the sharpen stars, 50 on the sharpen, and let's just see how long this takes. And hardly any time at all. You can see from the process icon that took 4.1 seconds. Very, very quick. Now let's look at Star Exterminator. And I think that process was even faster than Blur X. Yes, it was. It was 3.8, just under 3.8 seconds. Now we're going to move on to the M2 MacBook Air machine, and you'd expect this to be slower, but how much slower? Well, we're going to find out in a second. Everything is set up exactly the same way. This machine has got 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 megabytes of hard drive space. And remember, this is an M2 Mac. The MacBook Airs are now up to M4 processors, so you'd expect to see the difference in time taken to shorten considerably. Let's have a look on screen. We've got the script open with the same bias, no darks, the same 20 flats, the same 18 frames, and you can see the same post calibration and the same pipeline. We're still going to do the same 11 things that we did in the first video. And that process is now finished, and you can see on screen that it's taken over a minute longer than the other machine, but still not too bad at 2 minutes and 45 seconds. And you can imagine if you shoot shorter images of maybe 30 seconds or a minute on a CMOS camera, that over 100 images, say in a night, you could probably extrapolate that out to be taking 13, 14, 15 minutes time. So again, not too bad. And remember, this is an M2 machine. It's going to be faster on an M4. So we've got the same image on the screen of the Christmas tree nebula, and let's just have a look at how the other RC processes, the Rust Chroman processes, perform with this. So let's go to Blur Exterminator first. And we can see in the process console that that's only taken just over 8 seconds there, so fairly quick. Now on to Star Exterminator, and that's managed to do the job in just under 7 seconds. Now it's not all plain sailing in Macworld with PixInsight. There are a couple of quirks. There's one that drives me particularly mad. Although I usually have my process icons all set up, sometimes when I want to access icons, I'll go up to Processes, All Processes, and you can see it's laid out differently on a Mac. On a PC, you get to see all of the processes. On a Mac, you've got to scroll down, and that does drive me nuts, although there is a workaround. If you go into All Processes and say you wanted Star Exterminator, if you press S on your keyboard, that will scroll down to the processes starting with S, and then you can find it from there. It's one of the reasons that I'm using the Creative Console from Logitech, and this has massively sped up my workflow. So as promised at the end here, I thought I'd show you a little bit around Logitech's Creative Console, which I've mapped to PixInsight. Now this is not a device that I would bother buying if you're only going to use it in PixInsight, but I'm a Final Cut Pro user and I also use Lightroom, so it's well worth it for me. You can see from the buttons that I've mapped them. Now, unhelpfully, PixInsight does not have loads of shortcuts. So the way that you have to map them is through the Process Explorer window. Now, if you're interested, I can do an additional video on how to set that up if you'd like in the future. Write down in the comments below and I'll know whether you want me to do that or not. But the Creative Console, you can map the buttons just like any macro button. So if I hit dynamic crop, it will pop up on screen straight away. Whatever process I want to do. If I want histogram transformation, I press the button and it appears on screen very quickly. And I've mapped my processes on my Logitech so that they appear in a logical order, starting with the weighted batch pre-processing and moving through to channel combination, linear fit, and then onto your stretching processes, and finally onto scripts that I use. There's also a fantastic dial. If I just get the histogram transformation out of the way and go back to our basic image, you'll see on screen I have mapped some shortcuts, and wherever I click on screen, this icon will appear. So I can have it over here or over here, wherever I want it to be. So the very few shortcuts that exist in PixInsight, I've mapped to these buttons, and I've mainly mapped mine to the masking processes and the preview processes and the stretches. So take the stretch off, put the stretch back on. I've also mapped to do previews very quickly. I can undo the previews, and I've also done a whole load on masks, on showing the masks and hiding the masks and inverting the masks. So that's how I've set mine up. And so we come to the end of our time here today, and I hope that was helpful in showing you that a MacBook or a Windows machine, any machine really, can be used for PixInsight workflows, and they'll all work quite well. It's entirely up to you what you choose. A MacBook Air will get it done, and frankly, if I wasn't a Final Cut Pro user and using some other heavy elements, I would probably happily buy an M4 MacBook Air at just under £1,000, and that will do the job for me. My name's Martin, you've been watching Adventures in Astronomy.